Morning everyone, how are you doing? I thought I would do something similar as what I did last week, where I read my latest blog post and take breaks every now and then to try and either expand upon or unpack certain ideas, because what I want to do is to make my findings of this research much more accessible to more people, and yeah, I thought it'd be just an interesting thing to do. Okay, so this blog post is an introduction to the Psy-omatics of Encounter. In my earlier writing on Mesotopia, Towards a Place of Lyrical Inquiry, I proposed that meaning doesn't live in the mind or the world alone, but somewhere between, in the mesotopic zone where bodies, environments, and language meet. The Mesotopia is not a fixed place, but a field of relation, a shifting terrain in which the real and the unreal, the felt and the thought, co-emerge through the act of encounter. This is not the materialist view that there is a real world out there waiting to be known, nor is it a purely idealist stance that the world is just a projection of the mind. The Mesotopian perspective holds that the world is real, but it can never be fully known, only felt, intuited, translated, and partially expressed through our sensory and linguistic entanglements with it. This brings me to what I call the Psy-omatics of Encounter. By this, I mean the subtle interplay between psyche and soma, mind and body, in the process of making meaning from environmental experience. Every encounter, whether with a tree, a breeze, or a city street, is not simply registered by the senses, but interpreted by the nervous system, the emotions, and the imagination. These layers overlap and modulate one another in complex ways. The body registers vibrations and textures. The psyche weaves these into narratives, memories, and associations. Meaning, in this sense, is a psychosomatic improvisation, an event that unfolds in the middle space between our physiological being and the environment's affective impositions. So just to interject here, I don't think I'm doing anything radically new or different as such. I just think I'm articulating in slightly different ways and stressing slightly different things. So there's been lots of research into the idea of what many creative practitioners or artists call the liminal space, the space between. But they tend to frame this as a space of becoming, as though meaning making, like there is a progressive element to this. I don't think that it's temporal, because I have a very different from my research or experience, I have a very different understanding of what time is. I don't think time and space are external factors. And I build on Graham Harman's work here, in that, to me, from my experience of environmental being and trying to compose and make meaning in different environments, I found that time and space are very much integral to my interaction with something. It's not out there, it's more within the interaction. So in that sense, I don't see this as a liminal space of becoming. What I do see is that this idea that there is a real world, but because of my inability to completely comprehend it at all times, my intuition kicks in, and basically, to put it in one way, I make educated guesses about what the environment is constantly, right? So intuition is a massive factor in how I understand my environment. And I would argue, and in fact I do argue in my thesis, that this is in fact the normal state of being. This is not exceptional. Like, we are constantly, even now, environmental researchers who are much more using much more sophisticated equipment than I can come up with here, but they arrive at a moment of conjecture, right? They get all of this data in, and for them to interpret it, there is a moment of conjecture where they are literally making an educated guess about something. So I think this goes all the way through our understanding of our environment, and therefore it should be considered like this guesswork, or as I call it, intuitive strategies. These should be a part of our understanding of meaning making. Okay, back to the blog. This is where I locate the process of lyrical production. My process of lyrical poesis emerges from these embodied encounters. Rather than treating poetry as a form of representation, I use it as a method of inquiry, a way to stay with the textures of experience before they are translated into fixed categories. Through this practice, I explore how different languages orient us differently toward the environment. Some languages, for example, frame the non-human world as animated and relational. Others cast it as a passive backdrop for human action. By writing through and with these differences, I seek to expose the underlying psychic and bodily rhythms that shape our sense of environmental being. Just going to pause there. So the actual research I did for Plymouth University, I was studying 2 languages that were spoken in a particular region or place. Very different languages constructed very differently. The English language and the Croatian language. Both of these languages I'm familiar with and I was around while I was growing up. So I kind of wanted to just compare and contrast how these languages function when they're articulating orientations to the environment, but also does this kind of in some way reveal some way, as Worf proposed, rather controversially, that people perceive of environments differently, and therefore this affects the languages that they produce. And I think I made some headway and found some very good results there. Obviously, I didn't back up I didn't find conclusions or evidence of all the things I was looking for, but that's the nature of research. I certainly found some very interesting things that allude to what I'm saying, or at least, I provide evidence to the things that I say. Okay, back to our blog post here. It is crucial to emphasize that these encounters are localized events. They happen in the specificity of place, this humidity, this soundscape, this particular alignment of body and weather. Yet our minds often intervene, filtering these sensations through anthropocentric schemas. We name, measure, and categorize what we meet. This filtering process makes the world intelligible, but it also diminishes its strangeness. It reduces the real weirdness of environmental being, the sense that the world exceeds our concepts, that it vibrates with meanings we cannot fully articulate. Okay, I'm just going to interject there. So I use the term anthropocentric quite a lot in my thesis, and that means from the human perspective, meaning that whenever we try to conceive or talk about any environmental event, in order to make sense of it and to convey that information to each other, to communicate that information, we have to reduce it to terms conceivable to the human, right? So we're literally distilling something that is completely not human and trying to articulate it in human terms, which is why I think a lot of environmental research fails. And I think for this reason, really, we're in the situation we are, where there's a lot of a resurgence of skepticism around a lot of the discourse or narratives around environmental research. And I think it's because, so our materialist friends, our scientists, like our geologists or our oceanographers, they go through all of this process of gathering data. They then filter this through human terms. Well, now they use much more digital processes. But again, there is an element of best case scenario. And they're literally kind of using strategies such as interpolation and those kind of things, where they're trying to figure out what's going on from the available data. But all that's doing is still reducing the strangeness and the weirdness of the event into conceivable terms, which I think misses out a big part of the story. That's kind of what I mean by anthropocentric schemas, like ways of human thinking. It's really impossible for us to conceive what's going on with sun or asteroid or universe, because we're naturally filtering all of that through our nervous systems, really, and our sense of perception. Okay, back to the blog post. For this reason, I argue that intuition remains fundamental to any inquiry into the environment. Intuition is not anti-intellectual. It is the body's capacity to sense patterns before they crystallize into thought. It is how we orient ourselves towards the more than human field of existence. Much of what we call environmental knowledge, from early cosmologies to modern ecological insight, has emerged from this intuitive mode of knowing. The Psy-omatics of Encounter, then, is not just a theory, it is an invitation to think our way into the world again, to rediscover the lyrical intelligence that has always connected psyche, soma, and earth. As always, miath kar. Yeah, so what I'm talking about here is not just a compositional process, right? This isn't just about lyrical inquiry, but I think it comes out in poetry because poetry has the capacity to rethink and use language in very strange or weird ways, which actually work better to articulate, I would argue, the reality of environmental being. So in a sense of, I'm taking the philosophy of how I interact with the environment and then applying that to the compositional process, which then in turns acts as a form of environmental research. So I'll be going into perhaps more on this later on. I hope you have a lovely week. I'm going to a Thai tree retreat in the mountains, so the next time you see me, I will probably be zenned out. But lovely to see you. As always, miath kar, and thank you very much.